Hello. There we go. Hi, everybody. So I've been asked to very different and new for me, but not just here. Um, so I wrote everything down. I'm gonna try to kind of stick to that so I don't ramble. Um, yeah. So in case you don't know me, my name is Megan Schiffner. I am YPJ's wife, mom of three gorgeous little kiddos down there, and I'm going to take a couple minutes and share my testimony. So please forgive me if I don't know, just shared too much, shared too little. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, just checking in with you down there. All right. So I was born and raised in Sandy, Oregon, which is a little dot on the map, nestled in one of the most beautiful places in the world. I lived there my whole life, from the time I was 3 weeks old until I married YPJ. I had an amazing upbringing. I spent as much time as possible outdoors with my two siblings on our family's scenic 7 acres that's right at the end of the Oregon Trail. It's very different than my life these days of being stuck indoors pretty much all day. My parents, who've now been married for 45 years, were incredible role models in following Christ. They led small group Bible studies, sang and led worship, and instilled in the three of my siblings and myself a deep love for Jesus through their example. In our middle school years, they spent half of every summer going to England on mission trips, leading mission trips to encourage the people who already had a church there, but to also do outreach. My dad was really, and still is, really big about outreach and just connecting with people. He's also a fine carpenter and woodworker, and he is just all about excellence in everything he does. And he would often share the gospel with people when he was out getting supplies and doing installations, and then he would come home super excited to tell all of us about it. So you can imagine, as a kid, like that's part of daily life for us. Our church started really small, and then it just grew and grew and grew, and our family, unbeknownst to me until I got quite a bit older, was a bit of a pillar family in our church. And I also went to the Christian school that was run by the church, so I was very immersed in Jesus, morning, noon, and night. And my parents also modeled a loving and godly marriage, so I knew early on that I wanted to be married one day also. So YPJ and I met online on a dating site during my senior year of high school. The internet was still new, and I was good with computers, so after finishing my assignments early, I would browse MySpace, and on a whim, checked out matchdoctor.com per the suggestions of all of my younger male classmates that thought that would be really funny. But I just did it for fun. So we met on that website, and it was kind of hard for me to be convinced to give him my information because you know how those websites can be. I was actually about ready to cancel my membership or whatever, and that's when God connected us. And so, you know, months later, when I finally talked to him on the phone, it was like we had known each other forever, which was a really good feeling. But he also let me know pretty early on that he was pursuing his dream career as a combat controller in the Air Force, which is a highly elite and dangerous career field. And so he made it clear that this was his future, and we just remained friends. We were friends for 4 years, long distance. It's good to know, in case you don't, most people won't, that the Air Force combat control dropout rate is 80%. 80%. And just the rigors to get to the point where you can put on your red beret and blouse your boots and be a combat controller, that's 3 years in an extremely rigorous pipeline. And so as his friend, my job just became like, I was going to encourage him. I wrote him letters. I'd, do phone calls whenever we could to get updates of how he was doing. And I believed in him completely. I had no doubt whatsoever that he would make it. But also based on, how hard it was, like I knew that he was in for an interesting ride there. So it was no surprise to me when he made it. And it was a surprise to me when he invited me to come to his graduation. I was like, don't you have a childhood best friend or somebody else you can invite? But when I got there and he got done with his graduation, he had told me, like, I couldn't have done this without you. And I think I'm falling in love with you, which was a huge surprise. And we got married a year later, more or less. So I dreamed of being married, but marriage was really hard. Like, marriage just is hard. But on top of that, his job required him to be gone a lot. His job required constant training and deployments, and different things sometimes kept him away. I think the most busy year he had, I counted, he was gone 9 months out of 12. And that wasn't, I think that might have been 3 months of that was deployment, but everything else was like, go somewhere for 3 weeks and come back for 2 days, and leave for 3 months and come back for 4 weeks. And then, just total, the only thing predictable was the unpredictability. And I struggled a lot with loneliness and uncertainty and feeling like I couldn't build a life properly without him, because I had a picture of marriage like we should do things together. I didn't want to be an independent person, but that's kind of what I was forced to become and to make the best of it. And making friends was difficult. Making friends at church was difficult because our lives were just so fundamentally different than everyone else around us. Everyone was just nicely planning on their nice little lives. What are we going to do this summer? Where are we enrolling our kids at school? La, la, la. And I'm living constantly on the edge of knowing whether, like, is he going to come back, and how's he going to be when he gets back? And he struggled too. He struggled just because his personality and then his faith didn't match the culture that he was living in. So try to imagine, like, everybody's seen Top Gun, right? Like this, ooh, we're the elite guys, and like rightly so. I had high respect for them, but there was just this, just the ego and the wanting to make like the most of your life when you had the opportunity to do that. And he was more like, I'm gonna pull a younger airman aside and mentor them. And it just wasn't, it wasn't him. It was hard not to be influenced by playing Call of Duty and drinking beer, and hard not to swear, and hard not to, want to go out and buy a boat or buy a motorcycle. So we needed a place to belong, a place where his faith could be challenged, my faith could be challenged, and where we could be influenced to follow God wholeheartedly and not casually. And I guess we didn't really have a place that we agreed on. And that made it even harder for us to grow in Christ and to grow together. But God is faithful. So for me, even in that season, he used the hardship to draw me closer to him. And it was there that I learned one of the most stunning truths of this life, which is that our relationship with our spouse, with our kids, with the circumstances God has put us in, whatever that is, has so much more to do with our relationship with God than it does with any of that. And I guess what I mean by that, if you're scratching your head, is that can I truly trust God? Can I trust him when my husband may or may not come back from a deployment? Can I trust him when, I married him and I believed him to be a Christian man, but then life is getting in the way and he's not emotionally available, he's not responsive, his head is another place, which I totally got, but then it also was very hurtful to me to just be so alone. And could I trust him to make him the man that God wanted him to be? And I was just like, yes. I have no idea what that looks like, but he also rooted in me the truth that God is so good. It has nothing to do with what he actually does in my life, although there is that too. But he's just so good in absolutely everything, in creation, and his plan, his design, and he can be trusted. Even if the circumstances are completely out of control, and it felt like our circumstances were out of control lots of the time. He's completely sovereign. He can be completely trusted. So this has been the bedrock of my faith through many trials. How am I doing on time? I didn't want to go too long. One of them was that somewhere along the lines, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into being married, it was earlier than that, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I don't know if you were all familiar, but it's where your gut is totally messed up and diseased, and all of the lovely side effects that come with that. I was seen by a specialist and told, if you're going to have kids, you can't ever do it without going in and sitting for Remicade injections for, every 6 weeks. It's 3 hours of just sitting there like you're on dialysis or something. And I'm like, what kind of life is that? In that process, it was really frustrating because I was sitting there just kind of being spoon-fed, this is what you do when you have Crohn's. You take, a handful of horse pills several times a day. This is terrible. What can I do about this? And my specialist was like, well, this is your life now. And I'm like, that can't be true. So did some research. Was like, I need an advocate. I have nobody to advocate for me with the medical system to tell me what to do differently than just pills. But in my research, I was like, yeah, there's a huge connection between what you eat and how your gut functions. Fancy that. So I took responsibility. I was like, I have a role to play here. I took responsibility for whether or not I was taking my medication, and through trusting God and doing the right things and making big changes. Well, I did that, but then I went on a random trip with some teenagers to St. Louis for some kind of a weekend getaway. And even though I was the supervising adult at the time, I went up and I got prayer, and I just said, God, you can heal me. I believe that you can. I've never formally asked before. This is a really weird situation for me to be doing it in, but have these teenage kids prayed over me, and I absolutely know that God healed me because I haven't had a symptom since then. But I know I have my role to play also, and that's where I was like, God, I want to come into agreement with life and not with, eating whatever I want or letting myself get stressed out, which I still, frankly, struggle with. Back to kind of the line of the story. So after about 10 years in the military, YP suddenly struck me with the bombshell of he wanted to get out of the military. And the appeal was always like, okay, well, if you have to live through this, you want to stick with it for 20 years, and then you get retirement. And it was good, he made good money, but there was no discussion about it. He just wanted to get out. And so this, to me, was like, oh, well, the one thing I can count on physically is just we have steady income. And now we don't have steady income. But again, I was like, God, you're good. I trust you. And I supported and trusted his decision and God with our circumstances. And he struggled to find a place after that. He went into training for being a firefighter and didn't end up wanting to be a firefighter. And it was kind of this trial and error process. Having been part of one of the most high-performing, intense career fields in the world, he couldn't settle for anything that felt ordinary, and not even an ordinary church. So it was during this time that we started our family, and YPJ found this church. His all-in approach and deep involvement in it here led to one of the hardest seasons of my life. We were separated for 2 years. Many of you who've been here for a while will know that I wasn't here and he was. But I felt God calling me to stay away, which was really confusing. And 2 years later, then he called me to come. And I'm like, okay. It was hard. I carried a lot of hurt and distrust, both towards my husband and towards the church. For years, I've stayed kind of in the periphery, which is completely unnatural to me. I believe, I should say, in every church I've ever been a part of, I believe deeply in investing in the body. I've been involved in every church I've ever gone to, whether it's just for a couple of months or not, through women's ministry, serving, cleaning, food preparation, Bible studies, youth work, and being on worship team. And I've always felt that a church needs every single one of its members. But here, I struggled. I wrestled with distrust, loneliness, and isolation. And yet, even in my loneliness, God walked with me. So I think the turning point for me, if you want to use that phrase, was one day during worship. I felt very clearly, I heard very clearly the Lord say to me, "You need to forgive the pastors." I realized that I had been carrying deep hurt. I felt like they had supported my husband in his decision to leave our family, to be here. Imagine your spouse of 10 years, the father of your child, little sweet Reuben at the time, suddenly leaving you for a group of strangers, knowing that you didn't agree with his decision, knowing that it's hard. I can't get into it right now, but that was my struggle. How could he do that? And how could they encourage it? That was where my mind had taken me. And the truth is, I have no idea what truly happened between them and my husband. But irregardless, my anger and my lack of forgiveness was harming my relationship with the Lord. And I also needed to apologize, not just to them, but to God, for holding myself back, for not participating, and for resisting their efforts to welcome me. All of this is still very foreign to me, but I want to be open to whatever God would say and whatever he would have me do. And I can't do that while lying conditions down. And so here I am. We still doing good on time? So through the isolation that I felt, God has led me to pray for this church, not necessarily just as a whole, although there is that, but for each one of you, as I've gotten to know you. Worship time is one of my favorites because not only do I love worship, but God will also just like totally interject himself into the conversation and be like, pray for that person right now. He highlights people. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm excited to see the end play out with each and every one of you. Again, I realized that as a church, the church is only as strong as its members. And each one of us has a role to play in building it up. So as Ephesians 4:16 says, for his body has been formed in his image and is closely joined together and constantly connected as one. And every member has been given divine gifts to contribute to the growth of all. And as these gifts operate effectively through the whole body, we are built up and made perfect in love. So as I've slowly gotten to know some of you, I pray for you by name. And my heart has become knit to the outcome of the story that God is writing for each of you, for this group of people. And I know that's the way that it should be. So I'm grateful that that's kind of where he's been leading me, as private as that kind of is. And I pray that this would become a body of mature, active believers, just like more and more as we grow from glory to glory, where we invest in one another's lives, where each of us plays the role that God has called us to in order to build one another up, and that we're marked by our genuine love for each other, where it's not just like, hey, and let's talk about what we're eating today, but like, you know, we feel free to get into each other's lives, at least enough to be invested and know more and more of what we're doing. And I know that some of that does happen, but for my part, I want to dive deeper. So as to where I am now, I am absolutely a work in progress. The older I get, the more deeply I realize how deeply rooted my sin is. And the more grateful I am for God's continual work of sanctification. I am prideful and reactive. I still struggle with anger and with loneliness. Doing daycare has been surprisingly hard. And even though I've been blessed in it and through it, and I know it's like God's refining crucible for me, in it I've also come to grips with some hard things about myself. My weakness is an opportunity for him to manifest his strength in me as I yield to him and not give way to my flesh. But the trick is I need to train myself to do that more and more. I need to be diligent about that. So that's where I'm at. And I just want to encourage all of you in like manner, we've got to we've got to focus on the deep heart work. Not just like, what are we eating? Not just what are we watching? Although those things are very important. But we've got to work out our salvation. I can't say that I believe and habitually sin. And my sin is usually like, freaking kids, or my husband, and I find myself identifying way too easily with the Israelite people wandering in the desert, and I don't want to stay in the desert. So, in case we need the reminder, God cares about our hearts so much, not just the outward stuff. He wants all of us to be saved, every moment to be saved. I'm totally blanking on the reference right now. I want to say it's somewhere in 2 Corinthians 13 in there somewhere that talks about we need to test ourselves. We need to examine ourselves. Because if we find that Christ is not present in our lives, if he's not coming out of our mouths, if he's not present in our attitudes towards other people, he's not really in us. We're not really living out the faith we profess to believe. And we need to check ourselves, and we need to repent. And so that's again where I'm at. And I want every thought to reflect his presence, his work, his word at work in us, in me, because that's how he gets glory. So God is good. We can rest in the truth that he is completely good and he can be trusted. He has met the desires of my heart so many times. He has delighted me in his love. And I'm reminded again that his return is near. It may never be in our lifetime, but as far as we're concerned, we need to live like it's, tomorrow. We see how precious life is and how quickly it can be over for us. And we want to show evidence, have overflowing evidence in our lives that he is among us, that he's in us, that we're yielding to his Holy Spirit. Woo, I'm preaching. Okay. So that truth challenges me to live differently, to throw off distractions and sin, and to walk in a manner worthy of belonging to him. And that's my challenge to all of you as well. So right now my mission is just to live out what I claim to believe and to just do that consistently, and not in grand, dramatic ways, but in everyday moments where I struggle, where I fail, where I doubt. And even then, I trust that he will not fail us. And that's it.